Right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Sam Stetser at his home in McMinnville. It's August 10th, 2023. Thank you so much, Sam, for joining us today. First question is, why wine?
So to go to the beginning, I was born in West Virginia, but my parents, I was raised on a farm in southwest Pennsylvania, just a stone's throw from the West Virginia border, and my parents were back to the lander hippies. They, in 1972, they bought a 100-acre property in Appalachia for $17,000, and my mom was from the suburbs of Pittsburgh, and my dad was from the suburbs of Philadelphia, and they decided just to sort of check out and do their thing in the hills, and they had my brother and I, and so we had a herd of cattle and small orchards. We put up hay, grew a lot of different things, and didn't really make any money from it. We never really had much money. I saw my mom's tax records from those years, and the most I ever saw them make was maybe $7,000 in a year. But we were never really wanting for anything. We made our own dairy products and raised our own meats and everything. And there were no words for the kind of farming they were doing at the time, organics or regenerative or anything, but they were really practicing all of those things. They learned from the locals how to farm, and they learned from, Firefox books and some of the sort of resources that were kind of out there. And there wasn't really money to bring things in from the outside. So, I grew up shoveling the stalls from the cows and spreading it out in the fields, and using what was available in a closed system. And now I think they would call it regenerative farming or some of the nomenclature that exists, but they weren't doing that. And my dad was a part-time mailman, rural mail carrier, and my mom eventually went back to school and got her teaching degree, and they eventually got like real jobs, and the farming side of it kind of became less. The herd got smaller and stuff, but and then my brother left for college, and then I left, and the farm's still there, but not really actively farming it. So anyways, I grew up in that setting of Appalachia, and both my parents being back to lander hippies, they had a really large group of people that kind of all went out there for cheap land and jobs there were abundant jobs in the coal mines and barges running coal and stuff, which attracted a lot of sort of young people who wanted to live country life and have these relatively well-paying jobs. But they were all fairly well-educated and stuff like that. And so I had a group of friends who were the kids of all these people, but we also sort of lived in this community that didn't really value education and a lot of the things you associate with, Appalachia. And so I could not wait to get out of there, I think in high school. And I was a bit of a chameleon. I could get along with just about everybody, but I kind of felt like I didn't really belong in that culture of big trucks and racism. and a lot of those things. So I couldn't wait to go to the city and sort of discover more worldly kind of things. And so I ended up going to school at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., which is about as urban as it gets with college. And my mom had gone to school there, so I kind of had that primer. And so I kind of went the opposite, kind of the extreme opposite of that, my youth. And they did not have an agriculture school at GW. but I had bigger dreams and just wanted to be away from country life and farming for a while. And but it was a really expensive place to live and go to school, and my family's not a family of means. I had a lot of financial aid, which helped, but the cost of living was really high. And I ended up working in high-end restaurants to sort of get by. And that was kind of my first introduction to people enjoying and appreciating wine. As a kid, we had a lot of family friends and people that made wine at home out of whatever they could get their hands on. Just sort of, nobody was going out and buying fine wine. And I always sort of was fascinated with that culture. And so just bussing tables and working as a bar back and doing things, and I saw people ordering it and appreciating it and kind of got that. And then eventually I started waiting on tables at some pretty high-end, nice restaurants that had extensive wine lists, and I was so green. And I remember like the head bartender sort of sitting me down and giving me the lesson, and sort of like he pulls up a map of France and he talks about Bordeaux and Burgundy, and it was just like I had no clue about wine. I could barely name some varietals, Cabernet or Merlot or anything like that. And got a pretty good lesson pretty quickly about it. And so, we got through school, and I had a degree in international affairs, which wasn't going to get me very far. But I had this dream of sort of managing. I had a concentration in international environmental resources, and I was heavily involved with the environmental groups at school, and was taking internships at big NGOs that were based in DC that dealt with environmental resources, and so I had this dream of going abroad, particularly Central America or South America, and helping manage, their resources that they had available. But I was terrible at office work. I hated it. I took these internships at several big organizations, and I just didn't have the ability to sit in front of a computer and concentrate and really do the monotonous work that it took, and spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff, because I was raised on a farm. And, so then my then girlfriend, now wife, who you met a little bit ago, who went to school with me too, we moved to Portland on a whim. I had some friends from here, and we heard it was a cool place to live. I had never been to Oregon. And we bought a used Subaru for my dad and loaded up all our worldly possessions and spent a month driving across the country, and landed in Portland and thought we were going to conquer the world with our new Bachelor's of Arts. And that was 2004, and the economy in Portland was really bad at the time. It was really hard to get jobs when we got here, and we were applying for pretty entry-level jobs and competing against people with master's degrees and stuff. And so after like delivering phone books and kind of just applying to everything we could and getting nothing, I threw in the towel and walked into some restaurants and applied for some jobs, swearing I would never do that again. And I got a job at Wildwood Restaurant in Northwest Portland, which at the time, the food scene in Portland was really getting started. And that was one of the first sort of really high-end places that was selling Northwest sort of inspired food, and they had an incredible wine list. And so I started learning a lot about Oregon wine through that, and tasting a lot of wine. I got to meet a lot of prominent Oregon people. I remember, meeting Patty Green and other people that would come in to eat or sell wine or whatever. And I remember one time Josh Bergstrom's sister came in to sell some wine, and I came up to her and I said, I really love Bergstrom, and I'd really love to come out and like help out at the winery. Is there something I can do? And I remember she just gave me Josh's cell phone number. I was like, give my brother a call. I'm sure he'd do something. And I did. I went home and I called him and I'm like, hey man, and he was really cool on the phone. He was like, yeah, well, harvest is coming up. You come out and help sort fruit or something. And I'm like, that's it. I got it. I'm in the business. And he's like, yeah, I'll take your number down and I'll just call you when harvest comes along. And of course he never did, because it's like least of his priorities. And I didn't even have the wherewithal to be like, he's probably kind of busy. I should just give him a call at harvest. I never did, and it came and went. And I was like, well, blew my chance. And sort of that ran its course, and we just kind of got sick of waiting on tables and ho-hum jobs in Portland. And I actually ended up losing my job there because I just got really, I'm an introvert. The sales thing just isn't really, I think I was a decent, server, waiter. But after a long time of just sort of waiting on people, I got really just jaded. And it got to the slow season. I pissed some people off, and they were like, yeah, you got to go. And I was like, yeah, I probably should. At the same time, a friend called, and he's like, come on the road rock climbing with me. I was really getting into rock climbing, and so traveled around the country for a couple months rock climbing. My girlfriend, now wife, went to Asia to work on some organic farms, and we kind of got back together, and then we were going to move back to Portland, not really excited about it, and a friend said, come to Western Colorado and work on a peach farm, harvesting peaches. And we're like, sure, what else are we going to do? So we, at this point, we had a 1995 Mercury Sable. I inherited it from my grandmother. And we converted it into a car that we could live out of, tore out the back seats and made a platform to sleep in. And we went on the road rock climbing again, and then landed in Palisade, Colorado, working on a peach farm. And we did that for a little bit, and the farmer really liked us, and he said, stay here and help us with pruning. And we're like, okay, where else are we going to go? And we did that, and then there's just, a small grape and wine industry there. And I was really, really into wine at that point, really just fascinated by the process and everything. And I was making home wine at that point. And after doing the peaches for a while, I was like, this is fine, but I'll stick around if I can work in wine. And the owner was like, fine. And so I just went down to the neighbor's property. He had a few acres of vineyard, and I knew he was managing vineyards for another guy. Knocked on his door and said, can I get a job? And he was like, sure. And started working for him for $6.50 an hour, and couldn't have been happier. Started on my birthday in February of 2006. And just digging ditches and whatever needed to be done, just working out in the vineyard, moving wires, everything. And it was like the happiest I'd ever been. It was like my dream come true. And pretty soon he was impressed, and he bumped me up to $8 an hour. And at the end of the year, he decided he was going to leave that job and take another job. And the owner came to me and said, do you want to be in charge? I had never sprayed. I'd never done some of the sort of stuff that you needed to do to run a vineyard. And it was 35 acres of vineyard, but I was clueless. And he gave me a raise to $12 an hour. And again, I was like, I'm really like stepping up. And just me and a couple, Spanish-speaking guys. My Spanish wasn't very good, and learned a lot about powdery mildew and all the things, and just tractors would break, and he was really cheap and didn't want to pay for anything, so I would just figure out how to, replace an alternator on a tractor. And it was just an incredible way to learn, because I had to just figure everything out. And that it was just such a great place to live. I could get off of work and go rock climbing or biking, or, it was right on the Colorado River. It was such a beautiful place to live. It was really affordable at that time. And it was more about living than working. But the winters were really cold. The growing conditions were really tough. There'd be a lot of winter freeze. You'd have years where you'd lose half your crop, and it's like, well, we're not making money again this year. I didn't really have the resources available. Even at that time, I knew, the right equipment. I didn't have anybody to call, really, when I had questions. I knew there was a lot of things not going right, but I just plugged away. And in the winters, again, I would wait on tables to kind of make ends meet, because you couldn't work for like 2 months. It was just too cold. You couldn't start pruning until February or March. And one year I decided that I would go to New Zealand. I got a job working on a vineyard in Hawke's Bay, the Gimlet's Gravels. And I just wanted to experience like a real wine industry and just be a tractor driver, take orders instead of giving them. And that was an incredible experience. Working with them, they had never brought in an outsider before. This place called Matariki, which has since been consumed by one of the big wineries. It doesn't exist anymore, the label at least. Just me and some Maori folks and some locals who had always worked on the vineyard, and really hard drinking, hard living Kiwis who really took me in. And it was a pretty wonderful experience. And to see what it's like to work on a 160-acre estate vineyard, how it's done. And there were parts of it that were great, parts of it that were not great. And just learned a lot. And I think part of it I learned too was I need to move on from Colorado, for one. I'd kind of outgrown that position. So after 5 years of working there, I started thinking I wanted to come back to the Northwest. I'd always sort of dreamed of coming back to Oregon, but at that point my skill set was like Rhone and Bordeaux varietals, hotter climate, high desert. I was like, that's what I know. Like Pinot Noir and cool climate growing is so foreign to me. It's not, I don't really know. And I also wasn't really excited to come back to the rain. And so I took a trip up to Washington. I made some contacts and went around. I toured around the Seven Hills vineyards and stuff, and they were like willing to offer me a job. And then I came down here and met with some folks, the contacts I made. And I just walked into the Adelsheim tasting room and said, can I talk to the vineyard manager? And I ended up sitting down with Chad Vargas, who I actually am co-workers with now, but at the time they were looking for like a vineyard liaison, and sort of offered it to me. And then I met with Advanced Vineyard Systems, and they ended up offering me a Vineyard Manager job. And then in Walla, that was kind of the job I really think I was best suited for, but they had a really bad freeze that year. And they were like, we don't have any grapes to farm, so we can't offer you a job. So I ended up taking the AVS job and moved up here. And I moved up March 1st, 2011. And it was pretty eye-opening, for better or worse, because I got here and they were like, this is the coldest spring Oregon had to that point. It was the latest it had gotten above 60 degrees in a year. And it was like the wettest March they said they had ever recorded. I think it rained every day except for one in the month of March. And I had never cane pruned before, like a lot of sort of the spring practices we do here. So they didn't want to just put me in charge. So they said, okay, you're on like a probation or something for like 3 months, or maybe that's the wrong word. I wasn't in trouble. But, like a trial. And they were also like, yeah, we're going to pay you $13 an hour. And you got to just put in your work with the crew for a couple months, for 3 months. So they just dropped me off with a contractor crew, just tying and pulling brush, all those things day after day. And it just rained day after day. And my girlfriend was still in graduate school. She was in a social degree grad program at Smith College in Massachusetts. And so I was like on my own with my dog in a shitty house with like roommates, and it was raining every day, and I was doing this really tough work. I couldn't keep up with the crew because I didn't know the work, and they would just be like, what is this dumb kid doing in our crew? And I was like that close to packing my bags and going back to Colorado. But I stuck it out, and they were happy with me, and they said, all right, now you're ready to sort of take care of some vineyards. And those guys did a really good job farming. I learned a lot in those 2 years with AVS, and it was a really good introduction to some nice vineyards and stuff. But it was all sort of like planned out for you as a manager, and I kind of wanted to have a little more freedom to farm the vineyards. And so after 2 years, I had sort of been talking to Kevin Chambers, who I knew pretty well, and sort of telling him that I was ready to make a change. And he suggested to the guys at RP to talk to me. And so I met with them and took a job with RP Results Partners. Luke Pedati talked to me, and they had just taken on a lot more acres really quickly. They just took over Domaine Serene, and like in 1 year they had added 1,000 acres to their farming, and so they needed some help. And at that time in Oregon, it was really hard to land vineyard jobs. We were still kind of, that 2011 to 2013 kind of period, we were still really kind of coming back from the recession, and it was pretty stagnant. And it's hard to imagine now with the last couple of years, the labor situation, how hard it's been to get helped. And there weren't a lot of vineyards being planted, and grape sales were pretty stagnant. So I was pretty excited to get that. And RP, it was a little bit of chaos at first because they took on all these acres and they didn't really have the organization situated at that time for that explosive growth. And that was a really good learning experience to find out what it's like to work for a really rapidly growing organization that didn't quite have it worked out, and everybody was trying to do everything everywhere at once. So they put me in charge of the organic and biodynamic vineyards, the spray programs at first. And so I learned a lot about, because I didn't really have too much experience with organics and biodynamics. So I learned a lot about putting out the BD sprays, organizing, keeping on top of fungicide sprays, learned a lot about powdery mildew and botrytis. And then they put me in charge of a lot of fungicide spraying the next year. I was in charge of spraying so many vineyards, and I didn't really enjoy that. I didn't really like the compartmentalization, which was kind of, in those days, what RP was doing. They were really like, this guy's in charge of labor, and this guy's in charge of tractor operations, and this guy, me, in charge of like a lot of the fungicide, the spray programs and stuff. And I didn't want to just be like spraying vineyards. Like, not physically, I was managing all these people and just keeping the rotations going and stuff. I wanted to be like a vineyard manager, and I told him as much. And so then the next year, for the first time, they created this position. They gave me a group of kind of more higher end vineyards that wanted more attention, and they said, okay, you are in charge of the vineyard crew, the tractor operators, the budget, all of the sort of things, which didn't really exist there. And it was a lot better. I really enjoyed that, and I got to work with some incredible vineyards. And it was funny because some of those vineyards I was in charge of were Bergstrom's vineyards, and I thought back when I had talked to him, and now I'm like managing his vineyards, and I was like, oh, this isn't what I thought it would be. But yeah, there was a lot of pressure managing a lot of high-end big vineyards, and it was sort of just a lot to take in. But I learned an incredible amount. And I think after it was 4 years that I worked for Results Partners, I really think I was feeling burned out. They had me being a vineyard manager, but I wasn't what they called a client manager. I wasn't the boss. And I didn't get to make a lot of the key decision making. I was more just kind of following the orders. And I didn't have like an assistant, so it was I just felt like I was managing so much, and it took a big toll. And in those days, they would allow the guys to work as many hours as they wanted. So we had a lot of guys working 14-hour days consistently, or 6-7 days a week. And I was starting a young family. I had a new baby. And my wife, who, didn't work in the wine world and just really always sort of stressed out or worried for me that I was kind of consumed by my work. And it's when you have, even if you're not working those kind of hours, if you're in charge of a large group of people, and I would put my phone down on the counter and try to go have dinner or take care of the baby or whatever, and you come back and there's 5 voicemails on your phone, and this is 6:30 at night, and the least you can do is provide that tractor operator, crew leader, supervisor, whoever it is, the information they need so that they can work the next day or whatever it is. And so I'd have to excuse myself, go into another room, make all these phone calls, and it just sort of never ended. And I almost kind of had an ultimatum of, you cannot continue to do this. And so I had like kind of tentatively sort of put feelers out there for other jobs, and not many. And I think that I probably would have been content just continuing to do that for a very long time. That's kind of my attitude of putting my head down and just working, and not complaining. And part of the philosophy there, you know, they had this saying like, you know, act like a duck above the surface, just all calm, but below the surface you're paddling away like crazy. And I thought that was like a good philosophy until I think I had told a therapist that was like something that I had done, and she was like, that's the worst philosophy I've ever heard. Just push it way down and pretend that everything's okay. And so one of these feelers I had put out, you know, had suggested to somebody that I was sort of floating out there, like potentially looking, and that's when Atlas Vineyard Management reached out to me and said, would you be interested in talking? And after several conversations, I decided that it was probably time to sort of move on. And I did. So I started working for Atlas, and it did. I sort of, you know, got my weekends back, and it was a lot calmer, and Atlas was relatively small when I jumped on in 2017. We were a couple hundred acres. And it was a really nice change of pace. It was a smaller team, and the vineyards were a little easier to manage. Just a few large vineyards, and worked with Lauren Isold and the vineyard team with Atlas. And then once she moved on in, I believe, 2019, I took over as the regional manager, and it was my first time sort of just being in charge, and we've sort of steadily been growing, and we went from a few hundred acres to where we are today, which is 1,800 or getting close to 2,000 acres under management in the Willamette Valley. So that's how I got to where I am, and my title now is Director of Oregon Operations.
That is quite a path.
Yeah.
I've lots of questions. I'm going to go back. I want to start with kind of a rival in Oregon for the first time around, Portland 2004. Tell me about your initial impressions of Oregon and of the wine industry as you started to learn about it.
Portland in 2004 was like, it was, I feel like it was the golden age, and it was a magical city. Thinking back to it, and it kind of set the stage for where it's at now. It was so cheap. I ended up there partly because I had a really good friend who I had done a study abroad program in college in Barcelona, Spain, and it was coordinated by Portland State University. And so a lot of the kids in the program were from Oregon, and so a friend of mine, Jamie, we told her we're moving here, and she said, oh, we live in this great building, and we were just driving out, and she talked to the building manager, and he's like, oh yeah, there's a room, and I called him, he's like, yeah, Jamie says you're cool. It's all good. We didn't fill anything out. We just showed up, the door was unlocked, we moved in. It was this historic building in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, and $500 a month, and it was fantastic, and it was so livable. There were just like artists and musicians just flowing into town because it was so cheap, and it didn't have, it had sort of the hipster thing going, but pre-Portlandia, it didn't have the stereotypes of it. And now when I go back, it feels like every neighborhood has the artisanal ice cream shop, like sort of the same neighborhood you would see in Berkeley or a hip neighborhood of Seattle or Boulder, you know. It's kind of like a cookie cutter sort of impression of what it used to be. And it was like, it felt like a big town. It didn't feel like a city. You could drive across to anywhere in town in 10 minutes. And we would bike everywhere. And it was just a really, really fun place to be. And at the restaurants that I worked, or particularly Wildwood, it was, the wine industry seemed so accessible. People coming into the restaurant, it would be the winemakers or their, you know, immediate next person coming in, displaying their wines and stuff like that. And the few times we come out to wine country and they'd have, you know, their special pouring weekends and stuff, and you'd come out and it'd be the owner pouring the wine, and it felt great. And we did we had our honeymoon in 2008 in Sonoma and Mendocino, and I had never been to California wine country, and I had no interest in like Napa or the big industry. Coming from Colorado, I wasn't quite ready for that kind of step, and I didn't want to be a cog in the wheel, and I knew if I came, they would just be like, okay, you're in charge of, you know, buying chemicals for this vineyard or something like that. And even like Mendocino, we went to Anderson Valley, which for Californians is like on the edge of the universe. Even that was like, I went out there and we talked to people and they'd be like, oh, this used to be like diverse here and now it's just wine. And it's just, it didn't feel right. And Oregon felt right. It was just that right amount of stepping up from like a tiny cottage industry. And so, yeah, that was my impression of Oregon wine at that time.
So when you went to Colorado, you had done farming. You had a farming background. When you started working with viticulture specifically, tell me what did you need to learn? What was unique about viticulture versus other types of things you had grown and places you had worked?
I really liked the connection to place. I really just found the culture of wine at the time really fascinating, that you could taste a wine and, you know, alcohol like being a solvent and just pulling out every little flavor you could from that, and just knowing that I could taste the character of a Colorado wine. And not a lot of other sort of forms of farming had that kind of detail to it. It was the romance of it at the time that really pulled me into wine. And the farming part, just, you know, growing up on a farm, it's like you wake up and you just know there's stuff to do and you just do it. And, you know, my parents, there was never idle time. Like, you just did something and then you would go do something else, and then you would go do something else, and then you would go do something else. And my parents never stopped. And so I think that's what I was good at. And I still say that to this day. Like, I just, the other day, had a talk with our sort of viticulture interns who were here for the summer from various schools, and I had a talk with them about operations and kind of the business of what we do, and like the vineyard management model. And kind of my advice to them and everybody else is like, put your head down and just work. Show up on time and be reliable, and that'll get you pretty far in life. And so that's what drew me to the farming side of it, is like I knew how to do that. And I don't think I'm a particularly great worker. You know, my wife would probably criticize me for saying that, or sort of, but I think I've been really good about showing up consistently on time and just putting my head down and working, and it's gotten me pretty far in life. So that's what kind of drew me to the farming part of it. It was like the thing I was good at, because in farming that's most of the battle, rather than like an office job. Like a lot of office work, you know, people do just clock in and show up and you sit there, but it's not going to advance you. You need to like show, you know, your work. And so I think wine sort of helped me come to terms with the farming. It's, you know, because I still had in my mind that I was not going to be a farmer. I was not going to sort of do what my parents were doing. And but wine kind of added this new element to it that added like culture. It added culture to this rural agrarian thing.
So with wine specifically, you mentioned kind of your education in wine, being coming through a lot of restaurants and things like that. Tell me about learning the world of wine and getting to the point of understanding sort of on an educational level how to understand wine, how to sell wine, how to know wine.
I could not sell wine. I would never be able to sell wine. I take that back, because I guess in Colorado in the winters and stuff, there was just nothing to do. And so I did some like repping wine for the winery I worked for. The winery I worked for was out of Boulder, Colorado. It was called Bookcliff Vineyards. And so we grew the grapes on the western slope it was near Grand Junction, kind of close to the Utah border. And this very sort of specific, unique area where you could get away with growing vinifera. But then we would truck the grapes over the mountains 4 hours away to Boulder, where the wine would be made. And they had their channels, sales channels there. They'd tasting room, and would sell to Denver and Boulder restaurants and wine shops and stuff like that, but had really no presence on the western slope where I was. So, you know, for need of work or boredom or whatever, and also to change it up, I would start going around to restaurants. And I was actually pretty good at selling wine. I think it helped that I could be kind of the working man walking in. These guys deal with distributors and stuff like that, and they liked hearing my story and just seeing like a really earnest young kid trying to sell wine. And I did a pretty good job at that. But I think if I had stuck with it or made that my sole focus, the same thing would happen that happened to me working in restaurants, where you get really dull and numb to doing the talk. And like a lot of jobs, I guess, in general, is like the passion, at some point the passion wears off, or the romance of that job. You know, I always say that every job is really exciting for a couple weeks. After that, you need to find something else to kind of keep it up. And I think now that I've been in this industry for whatever it is, 18 years or something, that the marketing side of it feels so unappealing to me that I'm pretty content to just be in the vineyard doing my thing. And even the winemaking side of it, I don't know, it just sort of that thing that initially drew me to the industry has really worn off a lot, you know, that sort of really that fascination with wine. And at this point, I honestly don't even like drink a ton of wine. I've been in it so long, I can talk the talk, but I don't really enjoy just talking about wine styles, that thing. I've really sort of moved on to the logistical aspects of farming grapes and the people that do it. And it was really hard on me when I took over sort of the leadership role that I'm in now, that I didn't have those connections to like the winemaking community that especially my predecessor did. She was really good at making those connections, and I didn't really have that. I didn't put myself out there, and it was really hard on me, you know, because it is a big part of my job, the networking and being connected to the movers and shakers of the industry. And I really told myself I need to work harder at that. I need to put myself out there. I need to make those relationships. And as I move through it, I've realized that it's really not that important. It's more important to let your work speak for itself. And I did sort of, you know, eventually come to terms with that. I said, if I put my head down and we build a really great vineyard team, we do really good work farming vineyards, people will notice. And it's kind of a long-term game. It's sort of like I'm not selling my personality. I'm selling the work that we do, and it takes years for that to get noticed. There's with vineyard farming, it's probably less immediate. You know, with winemaking, you're staying in front of a group of distributors or whoever you're trying to sell your wine to. You're pouring the wine, and they either like it or they don't. In some ways, that's a lot more immediate. Now, the hard part is consistently doing that. That is a long-term game.
I'm curious, before we delve kind of more into the vineyard side of things, you mentioned that you sort of made some home wine at a time. Tell me about that process for you and what you sort of took away from making your own wine. I learned that it's easy to make okay wine. It's really hard to make good wine, especially consistently. So if you're a home winemaker, I mean, and I learned that it's no surprise, but the devil is in the details with winemaking. And any winemaker can probably tell you this, but making wine at home with whatever tools I have available, like red wine, you can get away with pretty minimal, but you know, I'm not a super detailed person. I'm like, let's make a good, quick decision and move on. And so I wouldn't track temperatures really well, or you know, the additions that I need to make, topping a barrel, filtration, you know, just all the things. And you would just sort of do it and hope it turns out fine. And for a while I would just scavenge whatever grapes I could get a hold of, and that was fine. And I managed Farsing Vineyards for several years and was really close with the owner, Mike McNally, who was really wonderful, and he would be so gracious for the work that I did.
at the end of the season or during harvest, and he would give me a half a ton of grapes, and he'd be like, it's the least I can do for the work you do. And it was like very valuable and stuff, but it'd be harvest, and I would like work, a 16-hour day, and then I was like trying to get it processed and do it all like in my garage, and I made this wine, and it turned out beautiful, but I think it had stalled, at a couple bricks. And it's like fruity and delicious, a little bit of sweetness, but it's like I didn't cross flow, I didn't, whatever. I just like bottled it and called it good. And I was like even giving bottles to friends and family, like really proud of it. And sure enough, like 6 months later, you open it and you're like, this is a little funky. I don't know. And you see where it's going. And I've got, at this point, like 25 cases in my garage. I expended the energy to bottle it and everything. And it was undrinkable. And it sat around for a long time. Finally, my dad was visiting, and we just like took it out to the dump and just hucked all these cases of wine into the dump. And so there was a lot of that. And when I moved back to Oregon, I started realizing I had an allergy to especially Oregon Pinot Noir. The histamines really affected me, and I'd have to take an antihistamine if I ever drank it. And it gets to the point still. If I try Pinot, I have to take allergy medicine, and if I drink like a normal amount, like 2 or 3 glasses of it, like I don't sleep well. It really messes me up to the point where it's really made it hard to enjoy drinking it. And so I just had all this wine piling up in my garage. And not to mention that when you're managing vineyards, people give you bottles and stuff. And I wasn't drinking it. And I think my wife was finally like, why are you doing this? Why are you making wine? You don't drink it. I was giving it all away, which is great. People love receiving wine. And nothing makes me happier than making other people happy. So I enjoyed that, but that's ultimately why I stopped making the wine. But it was really helpful to understand more about the process. And I have worked in wineries to a certain extent. In Colorado, I would go help in the winery. In New Zealand, I did some work in the winery there. Just enough to know that I didn't want to do that side of the industry. Because there was, at the beginning, sort of that question in my mind, do I want to go in the wine production or the vineyard work? And God, pumping and pressure washing and just being inside in a winery all day. And winemaking is mostly that. And it's like long, it's just monotonous and boring. And I think a lot of people, the romance of it or whatever is you think you're gonna be, displaying your wines to people and people oohing and awing over it. And there is some of that, but it's mostly tedious.
So you mentioned as you were kind of setting out back in Oregon, you had some options. You'd met with Adelsheim and you had Advanced Vineyard Service, and you were thinking Oregon, you were thinking Washington. You hadn't narrowed it down yet. What made you choose the role you did choose? Why did you choose to go with a vineyard management versus working for a specific brand?
Well, I wanted to manage vineyards. And it kind of, I had to make a decision, and talking with Chad, he was kind of like, with your experience, you should probably just take the AVS job. Like, he pushed me, and I wasn't, like I said, it was really hard to get jobs then, and so basically that was all that was offered to me. I didn't know what a vineyard management company was. I would have been more than happy to take a job at an estate vineyard if it had been offered to me. But I didn't have the connect. I didn't know anybody. I I was just sort of like wandering into, like, I came up here and it was winter, and I just sort of wandered in to tasting rooms and be like, is your vineyard manager around? Can I talk to him? And they would like say, hey, how you doing? Like, you know, but he was the vineyard, like, why would they need a vineyard manager if he was the vineyard manager? And I went into OVS and talked to Kevin Chambers. Kevin Chambers had come to Colorado. Our little grape growing organization had put together a talk of various people to talk about organics and biodynamics, and he and his vineyard, Resonance Vineyard, were deep into biodynamics, and he was featured in Voodoo Vintners and these sort of things. And he came and did a talk to us, and during the break I went up to him and I said, hey, like, someday I would love to come back to Oregon maybe, and can I look you up? And he was like, great, yeah, and he gave me his card. And so I went in and talked to him, and he's like, yeah, okay, well, good luck. You know, I don't know of anything. But yeah, it's an interesting sort of path that it took me on, that I landed with a vineyard management company, because now all of my experience in Oregon has been vineyard management companies. And the business model is pretty unique. You know, it's ubiquitous in California. And but certainly where I came from, it was like such a foreign concept, custom farming. And it kind of takes a certain manager, a certain kind of personality to persist in this business. It's so different than farming an estate vineyard, and it's really challenging. You have to really be willing to just go all the time, and it can be really stressful. And it's much more business than an estate manager who gets to focus on just the farming. And you know, I have a ton of respect for the managers out there that really get to dial in on how the plant processes silica, or, you know, sort of the phenology and the academic parts of it. That's not who I am. I don't have a degree in viticulture or agricultural sciences. My farming experience is feel and figuring things out and making it work. Growing up on this farm in Pennsylvania, it was very DIY. Like, my father never had an agronomist come out, or never, you know, he did all of his own electrical. He would split a tractor and replace the clutch if it needed to be done. We just didn't have the money, and it never sort of like dawned on us that that's what you would do. And that's kind of how I am now. Like, I think about, within a vineyard management company, how can we make this work? That's mostly what I do with people, the equipment we have. How can we be efficient? And we have a viticulture team who can tackle a lot of those sort of really granular questions and stuff, but our focus is making this work for our clients, and so much of it is financial. And so as kind of the leader of this group, our office is, how do we make this as efficient and lean as possible with maintaining quality? Because I know full well that our services are not cheap. And if it's not working for our clients, they're not going to continue to use us. So that's a lot of what my focus is now. And after doing this for so many years, like farming an estate vineyard, almost feels like a retirement option for me. After just being bombarded for so many years, because I have so many bosses. I've got all of our clients. We have close to 70 clients now, and all of them are my bosses. And then our main office is in Napa, California, and I have those bosses there to deal with, and I'm answering to all of these people, trying to keep them all satisfied, and the pressures of that, of having a viticulture team, and we have a big admin team, and all of our vineyard managers, and you know, the emails and the phone calls, and the gratification in the vineyard management model is that every year we have the opportunity to shine or not shine. If you're not doing a good job at the end of the year, you get fired. You know, our clients have a lot of options, and so if you're not doing a good job, you figure it out pretty quickly. And if you're doing, you know, a good enough job, you get to keep your clients at the end of the year. You continue the next year farming their properties. And if you're doing, I think, a really good job, you pick up a lot of work. So there's this sort of annual gratification, or, you know, scorecard of the job you're doing. And it's always evolving. We get to work in every sub-AVA. And now, you know, we're farming conventional and organic and biodynamic and regenerative, you know, all the things we get to do. And we have different needs and wants from every client. We get to work for small wineries, big wineries, investment groups, private landowners, some who are heavily involved, some not heavily involved. Just the diversity of that work and development work. Like, I love building vineyards. It's probably my favorite thing to do, and we keep adding sort of things that we can do. You know, we're now doing heavy ground prep, so we're renting really large equipment and doing our own clearing and things. Like, every year, hopefully we can keep adding to that arsenal. And just now I've been in the industry here in Oregon long enough that I get to see vineyards well into production that I was involved in the development and planting and everything, and seeing it come full circle and really taking pride in that. And the idea of having like a fixed asset on an estate vineyard where it's year after year, and kind of what drove me crazy in Colorado is like just seeing the same, getting to know every vine that well, and driving every row so often with a tractor and all the things. And for some people, they really thrive on that, being able to really get granular and improve that one vine year after year is really and it is satisfying. And I like to see our vineyards evolve, but like, I like going in all the different directions and seeing how that works, you know. But the flip side of it is it can be really demanding and really stressful. And when I talk to my friends who are estate managers, they cannot imagine how I do what I do.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You mentioned clients, having nearly 70 clients. Tell me about learning to work with that kind of variety of sizes, of involvement levels, of experience levels. How do you sort of find that line of what you can offer, what they need, and sort of keep your sanity, I guess? How do you find where that sweet spot is?
Part of it is like keeping my sanity, but my sanity is really tied to the sanity of our team, our office, what our vineyard managers can handle, what our equipment can handle, all those sort of things, and also where you are in a place and time in the company. And so right now we've got an incredible amount of work ahead of us, and the benefit of that is you can be more selective. And so in slow times, you're kind of willing to say yes. And so we had a leadership meeting with our whole team in California a couple years ago, and my coworker Shane and I kind of sat down and we talked about sustainable growth and what does that mean. And part of it was my experience at RP during that time of extreme growth. I kind of learned what I didn't want to do, and I didn't want to repeat that, of saying yes to everything, which is really tempting in our line of work. When you get a phone call, just to always say yes, and you'll figure out later how to make it happen. So, I get a lot of phone calls from some rich guy in West Lynn who wants 2 acres of vineyard in his backyard. And so learning to say no right off the bat to those sort of things, or clients with reputations, they've burned through 3 vineyard management companies. You can kind of tell where it's going. So we made a list of kind of our ideal clients, like not ideal clients. I don't really want to give you the list because we have both that we're farming right now.
Sure.
And just trying to really focus on the kind of work that we want to do.
How have clients changed in the time you've been working with clients? Obviously, you've been working with clients for a while. How have they changed? Are they asking for different things now? Do they have different expectations? Do they have different amount of knowledge?
Yeah. So, the industry has matured a lot just in the time I've been here, which is a lot less than other folks. Costs have changed a lot. When I started here in 2011, a ton of Pinot Noir was roughly $3,000 a ton. And today it's roughly $3,000 a ton. So the cost of grapes hasn't really nudged that much, in part because yields have gone up, the average yields per acre. People have sort of done that. Modern farming, spacing, irrigation, all those sort of things have influenced that. A lot of vineyards have gone in the ground. Wine sales have sort of steadily increased, but not at the pace that grape production has gone up. And then also in the winery, there's a lot of things they can't influence as far as costs go. It's really hard for the marketing teams and the winemaking teams to influence, what distributors expect a bottle of wine to cost. If you try to nudge your bottle price up, the distributors just go somewhere else. There's plenty of people to take that shelf space. You can't really influence the price of glass or labels or corks or any of that sort of stuff. One of the things you can control are your grape prices. You can negotiate your contracts with the growers, and we've had so many years where it's kind of tough to sell grapes, and you kind of just have to take what you can get from the winemakers. So that's been really challenging. So there's more and more emphasis on the cost of farming, as the growers are really struggling to get the revenues that they want out of selling grapes. And most of the people we work with are in the business of selling grapes, which is increasingly a tough place to be in Oregon. if you're not completely vertical, selling wine. And the cost of labor and diesel and all that stuff just keeps going up. And so what I've been really focused on is how to make it work for these guys. Because like I said, if it's not working for them, they're not going to continue to use us. Mm-hmm. So we have to make this economically viable. And so we've been really focused on mechanization, machine harvesting, fleet of all of the mechanizations, and that's where a lot of the management companies shine, because mechanical de-leafer, it can be $35,000 for one implement that does nothing but pluck leaves off of a vine, and it goes on a tractor that costs $60,000, $65,000 or more. So that's $100,000 in equipment just there. We have 2 machine harvesters that cost $400,000 each. We have 2 mechanical planting machines that are, it's a couple $100,000 each. And so it's increasingly harder for these smaller vineyards to mechanize on their own. And they really rely on us to be able to move that equipment around. Also the scale of the labor, we can maintain labor year round, and so we've been able to slowly become less reliant on labor contractors, which I'm not a fan of using, and I think a lot of the people running the labor contractor companies are kind of the underbelly of the industry. And I don't really like treating our workers as widgets, which is what a lot of these labor contracting organizations it is. You call them up and they show up with 50 people, van loads of people, and you'll see them for a couple weeks and then you're done with them and you'll never see them again. You can't learn names, you can't learn faces, and it's really an awful way to treat people. So we've been, with the scale that we are in the other companies, we've been able to sort of bring internal labor. We hire them directly, they work for us, and that allows us to pay them a little more. We're not paying a middleman to sort of bring us people. They know they can talk to me or anybody else. So trying to change some of those dynamics. And then back to the economics of it too is, we've seen the struggles in labor that we've had, and trying to incentivize people to be more efficient. And so being able to do more like piece rate work and bonus structures, and finding new ways to make it work financially for these clients, who increasingly it's very financially driven. And also trying to adjust the way that we've traditionally farmed, I think, in Oregon. The old style of Oregon farming and is, Pinot Noir being a very finicky vine and wanting to collapse, and trying to change trellis systems to make it easier to farm without necessarily compromising quality. Getting Oregonians more comfortable with mechanization. Trying to find ways to not do things that traditionally have been done. When I started, shoot positioning was really intensive and still is in a lot of places, especially in the North Valley, in the higher end places, and trying to see like getting away from shoot position, heavy shoot positioning. The hot years that we're having, and maybe seeing if we can get away with less leaf pulling. And so a lot of the logistics of farming is what I focus on, and the business side of it more and more every year, finding ways that we can make this work for people. The other thing is also just big business moving into Oregon. I'm sure a lot of people talk about that. We were really behind, like, say, California and Washington on seeing the big players come in, and now they're here. And the conglomeration of industries, and honestly, like, I'm part of it. Atlas Vineyard Management, we've sort of consumed a few small management companies, and now the big players in our business is Results Partners and us, and there's still a number of small management companies. And also, on the vineyard side, we're seeing just one vineyard after another being consumed by larger operations. We're seeing a lot of outside investment groups, dealing with them, which is really interesting. A lot of the work I've been doing is dealing with capital groups and investment groups, and it's really farming by accountants. And so it's just a lot of numbers and writing a lot of cost estimates, and a lot of meetings to talk about cost estimates, and really, really tracking. So we have and that's why a lot of these big companies like us, because we have a deep bench of financial analysts, and we can provide those variances regularly and the numbers that go with farming. And so that's been a big push away from sort of casual farming, the owner living on site or whatever, coming out and saying it looks good. And that's like all you need. And just really, really staying on top of costs and numbers and those sort of things.
Tell me about building and managing a team. How have you gone about sort of building the team under you, and how you manage them, and what you look for in sort of new hires?
I like to surround myself with people like me, I guess. I pride myself in knowing a little bit about a lot of things, and those are the kind of people I like, kind of a jack of all trades, and not necessarily specialized. I like people who care about their work. I think that's one of the most important things. I don't necessarily want somebody that's super knowledgeable, but that they care and they'll eventually get there. And reliability, and people willing to learn new things. And the nature of our business is that we're going all the time, and everyone has to pull their weight. And if a piece is not working, it all kind of falls apart. And so I'm really hands-off with the other managers, my coworkers. I'm not a micromanager, and I've got enough on my plate. I don't need to be checking in on them and their vineyards. I will if I start getting phone calls, or if the other managers call me and say, I need to deal with this situation, can you help me out? That's kind of where I step in. So our organizational structure is there's 5 of us kind of at my level who manage a group of vineyards. So I manage directly 400 and something acres, and we're all kind of in that field. Some of them have smaller acres but more vineyards. Sometimes a 7-acre vineyard is just as hard to manage as a 140-acre vineyard. And then, so we each have those, and then we kind of have our own specialties within that. So I'm kind of the quarterback of the team, and just making sure everybody has what they need. I'm finding the labor that everyone needs, and kind of putting out fires as they come up. I do a lot of the dealing with our California ownership and stuff. Another guy, he sort of does the new business handling, kind of keeping track of the new business. Another guy sort of manages the development work. And then another big part of what I'm doing is, Atlas, as I mentioned, part of their thing is sort of acquiring other companies, which can be advantageous rather than organically picking up a whole bunch of new acres, because you're acquiring their people. That's kind of the impetus, really, as much or even more so than the acres that come with it, because it's really hard to find good people. But also it comes with their own culture, which can be really challenging. I've sort of described it as, when the Normans invaded England, they expected everybody to speak French, right away. And that didn't work out. And it's kind of the same thing that we take these companies and they've been working under assumptions of how to farm a vineyard, how to record their time, how the organizational structure works, how viticulture works, how their spray programs are, and all these sort of things. And so a big part of my job is kind of steering them through this, and eventually, hopefully, we can get to a point where we're all kind of on the same page. And I've never worked in California, and even though we're a California company, none of us really come from there, and it's very different how they operate down there, obviously. And so I think we are uniquely Oregon, but we do have a certain way of doing things. So I've been really hands-off with those companies, but they still need a lot of guidance, because now we're sharing equipment, we're sharing people, and there's always this manager that doesn't like the way that this manager does it, and trying to get everybody to get along. And so, fortunately, bless her soul, my wife is a therapist by trade, and I've been privy to a lot of therapy just within my marriage and outside and stuff, and she loves to process. And for someone like me who's an introvert and kind of pushing everything down as hard as I can, it's really challenging, but she's really kind of made me step into that, and it's been really, really helpful in my job, because I am constantly getting barraged with complaints. I don't know, maybe the wrong word for it, but just issues, like human resource kind of issues when you have 250 employees, and it's so, everybody's just stressed out and going as hard as they can and dealing with all these things coming, because I'm not the only one dealing with all this stuff I was talking about earlier. Everybody's dealing with it. And as sort of like the buck stops here guy, I'm the one left hanging with it. Just, putting the tailgate down in a vineyard and sitting with somebody and just tell me what's wrong, and hearing people. And a lot of what I do is just listening. People just, I think at the end of the day, want to be heard and know that somebody's listening. And you're not going to fix the problem, but reassuring them that I'm here and I hear you, and it's hard.
You talked earlier about sort of some of the changes you've seen in clients and in the industry since you've been here. So tell me about where the industry is headed, where you see it going, and maybe what some of your hopes are for what comes next for the Oregon wine industry.
I hope that it gets easier to farm. The labor situation. I hope that the grape market I hope it improves. And it's hard because we're continuing, it's good for our business to plant vineyards and stuff, but we keep planting them. And a lot of these investment companies and stuff are really looking to make money on the tail end, and also the scaling of vineyard operations, which is no different than almost every farming industry. And we're seeing it across the board in blueberries and hazelnuts and grass seed, and sort of talking with all these people that the margins are getting tighter, but there is still a margin there, and if you're smart about it and good enough, you can capture it. But if you're making $1,000 per acre in profit, a 20-acre vineyard that you've invested a lot of time and energy and capital into, it's stupid. You're making $20,000. But a large investment company who can plant a lot of acres, can kind of squeeze it out, and they're also focused on 5 years out when they can sell it at the end of it and get their big return. And so that's the way a lot of the industry is going. And I think we've got a tough time ahead of us, that we're holding steady and we're doing a lot better than some of the other growing regions. But there's a lot of hand-wringing in the wine industry globally, mostly in the US, domestically, I think, just about the consumption of wine, the favorability of wine, especially in the fighting varietals. We're in a lucky position in Oregon. So that's tough. Climate change is a real issue. These seasons are just really tough. It's like almost every year we're battling these insane heat spikes or smoke or frost. Kind of one thing after another, and we're just like perpetually, there's always next year. It's kind of our mantra. And a lot of our vineyards do not make money, and it's hard to see a point where they do. And I can't tell you how often I meet with people about estimates, and they say, well, I'm not really in it to, I know I'm not going to make much money, and that's fine. They're retired people, or they made a lot of money somewhere, and, they just want to be hobby farmers and pay us to do it. I say, that's fine, but how are you going to feel about losing money for 10 years in a row? And so I have really frank, honest conversations when I meet with people on site and talk about the realities of what's ahead of them, because they don't generally do the research and stuff. And on paper, if you get this yield at this price, it should work out, but it very seldom does. So that's tough. I really care about the people I work with. I want to make sure they're happy and being compensated. I think through the years, I've sort of become more cynical about the wine industry in general, and you've probably heard this from a lot of growers. There is that big disconnect between the marketing and winemaking side of it and the growing side of it, and I think it's a lot starker in the vineyard management company model, because we're kind of, in some ways, the dirty secret of the wine industry. It's a very humble position, or you can't get into what I do hoping that you will be praised or whatever. Like, we won't be named in marketing materials. We're there to get the job done. And when you contract anybody, it's almost sort of purposefully to make a separation between you and that thing. And if something goes wrong, you're quick to be blamed. If something goes right, the winemaker gets to take all of the credit. And we really lean on armies of low-paid, unknown workers. And until like that revenue to cost of farming thing equalizer becomes more equitable, it's going to be really hard to pay people. And if we pay people more, we get complaints about the farming costs, and if that happens, we get fired and we're not farming anything, and another company who pays their people less come in and do it. And so I understand, the financial pressures on the winemaking side of it, and I know a lot of wineries don't make money too, and we gotta find a way to pay these people more and make it more equitable.
What about for yourself as you look ahead to the future? Anything on the horizon, personally or professionally, that you're looking ahead to?
Just continuing to build a good team, continuing to find ways to balance work and life. To me, work is not the most important thing. And I think in this industry, it's really easy to get consumed by the wine and the vineyards, and it's the most important thing in the world. And you have to keep reminding yourself that we're just making this luxury item for people of means. We're not saving the world. And it's been a challenge, and one of my challenges in Oregon, coming from Colorado, is like just living in that industry in general, people worked to live. You worked so that you could pay for your hobbies, which were really important. And here, where I live in McMinnville, which is a wonderful town, it's great, but like recreation is not important. Our county commissioners are actively opposed to recreation, it seems. And it just doesn't seem as important to people. And in the Oregon wine industry, people tend to be really consumed by wine as the primary focus. So as I mature, I try to sort of find space for my family and living and enjoying life. So that's what I'd like to do. Just getting to a point where our team is redundant enough and powerful enough that it doesn't just fall on a few people. And making sure the quality of life for the people I work with and everything is continuing to be good, which has been extremely challenging with the last couple of years and the labor situation and sort of how that goes. But as we grow, it does get more complicated too.
And the last question for you, what is your biggest accomplishment today? What are you proudest of?
My children, very proud of them. Proud of just the life that I've been able to build for myself, the comfort, how far sort of I've come. When I started in this industry, I never dreamed that I would be where I am now. As I mentioned, seeing vineyards come to maturation has been really enjoyable. And just the team that we've built here, I'm extremely proud of them. When we get through harvest and just seeing how hard everyone digs in and gets it done and just puts in 16, 18-hour days, 7 days a week to get through it. And at that moment, like, I couldn't be prouder of the people I work with. And like, I genuinely appreciate them and respect them and just have a lot of love for all those guys out in the field.
All right. That's all the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything that we didn't cover here today that you'd like to cover?
I think that's it.
Covered it all.
All
Excellent. Right. Thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your stories with us, sharing this beautiful space with us. We really appreciate it, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Okay.
Thank you.